So welcome. We are here to discuss, I think, what is one of the most interesting topics related to democracy today, which is the role of social media. So is it an echo chamber? Is it an agora? Is it an agora, as I learned is how you pronounce it in Greek? Or is it something else altogether? So here with me today is Laura Chinchilla. She's the former president of Costa Rica and the chair of the Kofi Annan Commission on Elections and Democracy in the Digital Age. We also have the valiant Crystal Patterson, who's here representing Facebook. She's their Global Civic Partnerships Manager. And we have Alvin Carpio, who is the chief executive of the Fourth Group, an advocacy organization focused on tech issues. I'm Alicia Wittmeyer. I'm one of the editors of the opinion section of the New York Times. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. So let's jump into it. And I want to say to the panelists that this is a conversation, so I will have questions for you, but please feel free to jump in. So Laura, I wanted to start with you because one of the points that you made as we were preparing for this panel really resonated with me. So you said that we talk a lot about the ways in which social media shapes democratic processes in the developed world, but you said we talk less about how it operates in the global South. And you have led electoral missions in places like Mexico and Brazil and Paraguay. And so I wanted to prompt you to talk a little bit about that. If we are talking about social democracy and we're not talking about the global South, what are we missing and what are we misunderstanding?
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you very much. And good morning, everybody. We have been debated for almost 2 days on this issue. So I excuse myself if I repeat some of the concepts that had already been said before. But the first thing we have to recognize that this is a very complex debate, and that there are not easy conclusions when it comes to the benefits or the perils of social media on democracy and our institutions. It is also true that social media didn't create most of the problems that we have been discussing here, but in certain way, they are amplifying some of those problems. Part of the complexity that we have to consider is that social media doesn't behave the same way in all the regions, in all the societies, in all the contexts. So it is very important to understand that some countries are more vulnerable than others. So that is what happens when we talk about the global South. However, most of the focus has been on what is happening in the industrialized countries. Just let me mention why we say this. For example, in the global South, it is more common to find high polarization levels, weaker institutions, public distrust on those institutions, but also on traditional media outlets, partisan kind of media, and also very low levels not only of digital literacy, but literacy in general. So those are the kind of vulnerabilities that we have to aware when we analyze about the negative effects of social media on public debate, deliberation, and on democracy.
And I mentioned Brazil specifically, and I think you were in Brazil in 2016, not 2018, correct? 2016. But for what it's worth, the
general elections.
And you were also in 2018.
Yes.
So the Times did a lot of reporting on the role of social media in the 2018 elections. Of course, the 2018 elections are the ones that brought Jair Bolsonaro to power. and the role played by WhatsApp, which is owned by Facebook, by YouTube. And I wondered if you had any firsthand experience and you saw those dynamics playing out in Brazil.
Sure. Well, at that time, Brazil was going through many kind of different problems. The situation was very complex. First, the economy was growing at very low rates. There were many concerns on the corruption issues. They were going through the most amazing corruption scandal probably in the world associated with the Lava Jato or Odebrecht issues. And third, the country was very polarized on cultural issues too. So we arrived to Brazil trying to analyze the situation and the scenario of Brazil under the same kind of parameters that we saw in the United States during the 2016 elections. But we were wrong, and everybody was wrong, and even the tech platforms were wrong because all of us were monitoring mostly Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google, etc. Suddenly we realized that the preferred platform in Brazil, which is the same that happened in India later and in other elections in third world countries, the most preferred platform is WhatsApp, which poses many challenges because they are not accountable for the information they are exchanging in that kind of messaging platform because they are encrypted platforms. Why the Brazilians were using this kind of platforms? Because they do not rely on any kind of source. The only reliable sources for the Brazilians at that time were their own peers, their families, their friends, and so WhatsApp became the preferred platform, and that was used by the political parties to spread disinformation in really, huge amount of misinformation went through WhatsApp. Probably Crystal can tell you what they finally did in trying to, to face this problem, but it was too late because when we realized that, it was just 3 weeks before the elections.
And just to kind of illustrate how messy things can really get, one of the Times did some great reporting on social media in Brazil, and one of the things that they found was that WhatsApp was being used to spread misinformation that was originating on YouTube. So WhatsApp is obviously owned by Facebook, YouTube owned by Google, but they were interacting in this very messy way. So it sort of speaks to the complications of trying to resolve this issue. So Crystal, I feel like it's kind of fair at this point that you get a chance to sort of speak to, what did Facebook learn from the 2018 election in Brazil?
Sure.
These other,
good morning. Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here and have this conversation with you. WhatsApp is tricky. It's a different form of communication than Facebook or Instagram. Those platforms are designed to sort of be broadcast channels in a way, whether it's with they're both more public in that people can follow you, and it's pretty easy to see what you're sharing on the platform if it's public. WhatsApp is designed for mainly one-to-one communication or one-to-few. What we realized, and we were trying to think through ways to help avoid some of the mass spreading of information on WhatsApp that we can't see, and a few ways we thought of to introduce more friction as we talk about it, so it isn't as easy for things to move around so fast, is to limit the number of people you can send any one message to, and also to limit the number of times a particular message can be forwarded, just to help stop the virality of some of this content. It is a constant balancing act for us. We get complaints when people can't see the content that's being spread around, while we're also obviously under great pressure to make sure that we're protecting privacy and not interfering in people's personal communications or putting that out publicly when we shouldn't be, or interfering in that. So we're trying to strike that balance. We do think it's really important for people to be able to communicate about issues and talk to each other. A lot of people rely on WhatsApp as a cheap and easy way to stay in touch with friends and family, and sometimes in places where otherwise it would be prohibitively expensive for them to stay in touch. So we think there's great value in the platform. And it's also a challenge because we can't control. We have community standards on Facebook. We can't control what's on YouTube. And so, if they share a YouTube link on an encrypted message, there's only so much we can do about that. But we are trying to be more thoughtful about ways of addressing these issues, because we certainly don't want to be enabling bad behavior, but we do want to preserve the value of the platforms for people.
So I think that this discussion about Brazil and what we didn't know about Brazil sort of sets up this broader issue, which is, so we have these discussions often in places like Europe or in places like the US about what to do about social media, how to sort of either make policies around it or regulate the companies. And we do that in part, one, because a lot of these companies are based in these places, also because these governments are the only entities sort of large enough to tangle with some of the biggest companies in the world. Is that, if we are making these policies and making these decisions in the developed world, are we essentially sort of setting the terms of how they'll operate in other parts of the world? And is that a problem? Are we going to get it wrong in places that are more vulnerable, perhaps, because we don't have sort of the right processes in place to understand how these are working, the right cultural competencies?
Well, I will say that the problem is that the Global South has not been in the focus. Most of the discussions are not considering those specific situations. And in more general terms, I will also say that unfortunately, democracy in the Global South has not been in the focus either. It is very hard, for example, when we travel all around the world, get people to understand what is happening in Venezuela, for example. And I want to congratulate the Athens government for having recognized the representative of Juan Guaido here. But so the problem is that also we have to understand that we can allow those countries to take the initiative alone, because sometimes they don't have the muscle to face the power of those big tech platforms. And secondly, when they take action, sometimes they react through very authoritative kind of behavior. They do not call the civil society to consult, so we can come up with another kind of dangers to freedom of expression. So the important thing here to say is that the approach has to be through international cooperation. And in that sense, it is very good to see what the General Secretary of United Nations is doing through the high panel on digital cooperation, because what we need are some kind of values, principles that can orient the rest of the world about the way to approach the regulation of social media.
That's really interesting. And Alvin, I'll come to you in a second, but I just wanted to ask Crystal a broader question related to this as well, which is so we know Brazil is not, Brazil in 2018, where there was this sort of issue of misinformation spreading, is not the only instance in which, Facebook has come under fire for how it's affected countries in the developing world. So there was the spread of misinformation in the Philippines, and notoriously Myanmar, and Sri Lanka as well, I think, is one of the other places where there was these countries with weaker institutions where information spreading on social media wreaked a little bit of havoc. Sometimes
there was havoc existing in all of these spaces before social media. I think social media has magnified what was already existing. I don't think we created the strife. I just want to clarify.
That's fair. But I guess my question would be, a lot of times, these things have happened and everyone sort of reevaluates afterwards and says, we understand what happened here and we're going to take steps to fix this. What is Facebook doing about the larger issue of sort of cultural competency in a way that sort of addresses the issue of understanding the context of the places that it's in before something happens instead of correcting itself after the fact?
Well, we do spend a lot of time we do try to work with governments, we try to work with civil society, we work with a number of international organizations that just have a really strong sense of kind of cultural standards, the geopolitical dynamics in specific countries and regions, to kind of help inform how we're thinking about our tools and how they're used. And we've gotten better with this over time. To your point, there are a number of places where we've sort of been way too late about understanding the impact our tools were having on existing difficulties, and it is a challenge. In some places when governments don't like that people are talking on our platforms, they just shut them down, and that also is difficult because there are a lot of good conversations and ways that people are able to support each other in these difficult areas using our tools. Again, we're trying to work much more collaboratively as we think about these challenges, and our problems haven't just existed in developing countries or in the global south. I mean, the United States was the focal point of a lot of these issues after the 2016 election. And I think our kind of positioning as a company is, I talked about this yesterday a little bit in our session about we're just trying to be more defensive drivers and thinking about how our tools get used and being more thoughtful about how they can be misused and trying to mitigate for those situations ahead of time. But again, a lot of times people who are using the platform maliciously or using it for bad things, it's sometimes hard to predict how that's going to play out. I think for some of these things where people are just sharing misinformation, we're trying to crack down on what we can on our platforms, and again, try to create more friction so it's not as easy for this stuff to spread. It's a huge challenge, but we're continuing to work on it and want to work with civil societies, governments, and really, honestly, anyone who has good input. We're all about innovation and ideas. We'd love to help solve this.
So switching gears a little bit, I wanted to turn to the question of echo chamber versus Agora, because Alvin, when we were talking before the panel, you said something interesting to me, which is you said when you were thinking about this panel and the question of whether social media created an echo chamber, you said, and I'm paraphrasing you a little bit, but you said that to some extent you thought it was just making echo chambers that already existed more evident and easier for the rest of us to see. Can you talk a little bit about that and sort of see how you came to that point of view?
Of course. Good morning, everyone. Kalimera. It's lovely to be here in this whole forum to celebrate democracy and think about its future. Listen, I think it's time for a reality check on this last day of the forum, where actually, when you think about it, democracy itself for millennia has been an echo chamber. Places like this building that we're in now, the UK Parliament, political institutions have been so exclusive that they've been an echo chamber for the elite. People like me, born and raised in places like East London, where I was from, one of the poorest boroughs in the United Kingdom, people of colour, women, fought for the ability to be able to even vote. And we need to really think about that historically. That's very recent. And when I think about the fourth industrial revolution and technology and the ability to actually see what people truly think, I think that's actually a beautiful thing, where we're hearing voices that we never heard before, where the means through which you can express your views and your ideas is no longer beholden to a gatekeeper. And so I think we need to celebrate the fact that social media has allowed for that. I think the huge risk, though, is the idea that people who express their views that are different to those who are educated or defined as the elite and the intellectuals, if you dismiss that as a group of people who are twerps, if you dismiss those people as ignorant, as stupid, that's when democracy is going to fail. Because actually, in many ways, democracy is more alive than ever. Brexit, Trump, Duterte, for many people, this is the first time they won. Because for generations they had lost. And so I think there's a very crucial time in global democracy to think about whether or not you see these people as stupid and you silence them, or you try and figure out how it can be used to get a better democracy for the future.
And I wanted to, I guess, maybe I would say maybe push back on that a little bit to see what your response would be. And Laura, I remember yesterday too, you said something along these lines, which is, you know, social media is sort of a mirror reflecting our society back at us. And so if we don't like what we see, you know, maybe that's not social media, that's society. I guess my question would be for all of you. So we heard, for those of you who are in the previous panel, we heard Katrin talk about her experience with YouTube in Germany. And YouTube is sort of notorious, right? Because YouTube is a channel that people cite, you know, they start out watching some video about how to sort of do DIY plumbing under their sink, and like 3 videos later they're watching Nazis or something like that. And so I guess the question is, you know, is social media just a mirror that is reflecting ourselves back at us, or does it have the capacity to actually change our behavior and change our thinking? That's, I guess, the question for both of you. You know, is it just revealing echo chambers, or is it actually changing how they function?
Just to put some ideas, not much different from what I said yesterday, but it is true that most of the problems we have been discussing are the kind of structural problems that we have been discussing for many years. If today, for example, we have this feeling that instead of getting a kind of Roman Agora, we are getting a kind of Roman circus where everybody's shouting at the same time, driving by emotion rather than reason, and in certain way also venting their frustrations on those in the arena, is because we didn't do the job before. We have nurtured that kind of societies. We haven't invested in civic values. Again, once again, democracy has not been a priority for the world in the last years. So we have to take very seriously democracy itself, what it means in terms of forming our citizens. Now, having said this, of course, social media have to be also responsible for the impacts they can create in this context. They are part also of the problem and of the solution. So I think we can speak about some of the regulations, some of the code of conduct, some of the good practices that they have to adopt, but at the same time, we don't have to lose the focus about the deep problems we have when we talk about the democratic deficits in our societies.
And Alvin, I don't know, did you have anything that you want, do you have any thoughts on whether social media is actually changing how we think, or is it just revealing, is it just giving people voices that didn't have them before? Is it changing how those voices speak?
I think, and the point I really wanted to look at actually is because, you know, when you think about social media and democracy, people think about what the other folk using the platforms are doing. Whereas, in a way, we're kind of not seeing what's behind the curtain. You know, we're focused on the glitz and glamour of tech and digital and algorithms and all these kind of buzzwords, artificial intelligence. But in the end, Facebook, Google, they are companies, put simply, with a profit motive, which is fine because we live in a capitalist society. But when you really just go to its core, then that's when you have to consider sometimes asking questions. You know, are Facebook, giant tech, Google too big for democracy? I.e., you know, we did a campaign back in 2017 in response to Cambridge Analytica and the misuse of data. And 180,000 people across the UK signed a petition calling for Mark Zuckerberg to appear in front of UK Parliament. Now we were ignored. We still haven't had a response after delivering the petition. And I think that makes people feel like there's a lack of democratic accountability there. And as I said already, admiring the beauty and the possibilities that Facebook have created, whilst also ensuring that in order to build an inclusive capitalism for this fourth industrial revolution, we also need to ensure that democratic accountable. So I think there's a question there about what is the reality behind social media companies, not just given what we see on our phones, but also the nature of them as companies themselves.
And that also, that sort of touches on an issue that's been happening in the U.S., which is Elizabeth Warren, the senator and presidential candidate, as you all know, has made breaking up tech giants a part of her campaign. They had a sort of, she had a kind of kerfuffle, I don't know what you'd best call it, with Mark Zuckerberg a couple of, maybe last week or the week before, in which a video got out about, or audio was leaked, in which Mark Zuckerberg called Elizabeth Warren's plans, and I use the word existential. I don't know if he called it an existential threat, but the gist was that it was an existential threat. Crystal will correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure, and promised legal action should she try to pursue it. So I guess that raises the question, alongside what Alvin was saying, how should we feel about the fact that Mark Zuckerberg, who has tremendous control, if he wants to use it, over the political news that Americans see, sees the plans of one of the presidential candidates to dial back that power as an existential threat. How should we think about that situation? How should we feel about it?
Well, I would encourage everybody to go and read the full transcript of what Mark said. I think he made very clear that he doesn't want to be fighting with her in this way, publicly or not. I think, his point was that he's created this company and is going to stick up for it. And I think, most of us that work at Facebook, if not all of us, believe we're doing good work for the most part every day. We're certainly trying to solve some big problems, and we want to solve those problems. And the larger point of what he was saying was that we don't want to be battling with governments or other people. We want to be figuring out these solutions together, and that having us focus on having these political arguments is, I think, not really what we should be spending time on, but on solving these bigger challenges like the ones we've been discussing here. I want to go back to your previous question about behaviors. The technology has changed our behaviors. I don't think that's a Facebook thing. I think that's an internet thing. These tools are available. Facebook wasn't the first social media platform. We're not going to be the last. We are very large and seeing issues that haven't arisen before because we haven't had a communications platform like this before. And so we're kind of the focal point. I think we're really trying to, no pun intended, lean into figuring out some solutions and we're trying to figure out solutions that aren't just about Facebook, but about the implications of technology and how people use it. I do want to also reference something Alvin said before. Elizabeth Warren is actually a great example. She's built a huge following on Facebook. A lot of, she's been able to raise money off of the audience she's built there and get her message out. She's had one of the biggest pages for a long time on the platform, even before she was really as well known nationally. Same thing for Bernie Sanders. In the US, we have several examples we have Pantsuit Nation, which started out as a very small group of women kind of interested in supporting Hillary Clinton that has blossomed into a community that continues to thrive to this day. The Women's March started out with one post on Facebook and became a global phenomenon. There's a lot of activism that happens for people who otherwise would not, I think, be heard in a lot of our traditional systems because of this technology. And so, again, there's a balance of the good and the bad. I do think it's changed our behaviors. I used to do digital work in politics, and for an upstart campaign or an unknown candidate, being able to use the internet to quickly kind of help get your message out and raise money is critical, especially with the media cycles we're in. And so I think there's a lot of value in this stuff, and it is changing our behaviors. We're trying to think about the best ways to address that. And again, one thing I will say to the question about us, being in kind of a capitalist society and the accountability, in our defense, I think what you've seen over the last few years is when there is a problem identified with us on the platform, we do try to move really quickly to fix it because there is a real incentive for us to do that so that people want to continue to use the tools that we provide. So after Brazil, we tried to move quickly and figure out ways within the platform to stop people from forwarding and spreading the misinformation as quickly without damaging what makes the products so useful to people. And in the US, we've made a ton of changes. I could bore you all day with all the changes that we've made in response to the election of 2016 and that we're continuing to focus on. So there is accountability for us in the sense that when we hear from people that we're getting it wrong and they're not happy with our tools, they can vote with their feet, and we are very aware of that. And so we have to be accountable in that respect. I realize it's not the same thing as passing a bill in government, but honestly, I think in a lot of places, we've been able to move faster than government would have been able to address a lot of these things. So.
But I guess my question was pivoting off of the sort of capitalism and the sort of profit motive and all of that. This is kind of a very fundamental question to ask, I guess, with just a couple minutes left, and I want to give you guys a chance to ask questions. But to me, what I think is very interesting about the situation with all social media companies, certainly not just Facebook, is you can sort of correct for bad actors, right? I think that's hard to do, but relatively easy. But hard.
Come on board, help us.
And you can, I mean, yeah, I don't want to sort of trivialize it. It's hard.
Please, go ahead.
And sort of misinformation is I think a harder problem because, I sympathize with the idea you don't want to be arbiters of truth, and I understand that argument. What to me seems very difficult and sort of fundamental, and I'm not sure how to resolve it, is that these are companies that need to make a profit, and so what we know that they're sort of selling eyeballs, or that's sort of how we can come to think of it, or they're sort of competing for our attention, and so how do we sort of, and they do so via these algorithms that remain a little bit mysterious to the outside world. And we know, and they're sort of a trade secret, and at least with some companies, YouTube, as I said, notoriously, that they keep these eyeballs essentially by just sort of shoveling, more and more extreme content at you. And that's their strategy. And so I guess, as I said, this is a big question for not that many minutes left, but that seems very fundamental to me, to the model, and and I'd just love to hear how you guys are thinking about that issue and how you think about the fact that we don't know much about how these algorithms work. We sort of have to guess at them.
Can I touch on that, actually?
Yeah,
I think, the cheesy phrase, with great power comes great responsibility, and I think the tempering power is democracy. That's why we have journalists. That's why we have civil society activists. And there needs to be a balance between all of those interests: business for the economy, for growth, for jobs, people's livelihoods, and the people who are at the bottom in terms of low wages and so forth. But in the end, democracy needs to be about the whole public interest. And so that's why I think, yes, we can have these debates, and it needs to happen all the time. And there needs to be an open channel between ordinary folk as well as people in power. And so when people ask for the democratic accountability of a corporate leader to appear in front of UK Parliament, there's something quite, it's effectively a balance between powers, representative politicians versus powerful corporates. And I think, it needs to, in a way, to be very upfront and straightforward. Over some of the conversations that I've had over the last couple of days, not only here but also outside, there's this optic or this sense that Democracy Forum in Athens, with such great people in the room, in a way I would be remiss without saying this, but people feel like it's being bought out again by big companies. Now, the nature of running any event is that you need to work in partnership. But I think we need to be very careful. We just need to be careful that this is why people are angry. This is why young people who have come here feel disillusioned, because they're like, is this how it really works? Yeah. And I won't quote the person who said that, but it reminded me of the first times I've ever engaged in these events. And we need to be honest with ourselves, because if we're not honest and we're not true and we don't change, then anger will even increase in more ways than we've seen so far. Okay, and I don't want to cut you off, but I want to give Crystal a chance to respond and then also have a little bit of time for questions. So.
Yeah, so we've really tried to move towards being a lot more transparent about how we operate, both in terms of how we've changed policies and how we're thinking about these issues. We're trying to show up in more places and take hard questions and be more open. I think it's some of it how it gets characterized. Like when you get on Facebook, you find some friends, you like some pages, and that's what starts to populate your feed. And it isn't. I mean, the algorithm in its zeros and ones is complicated. But the fundamentals, when I used to teach people how to effectively use Facebook well, I'd walk through how newsfeed works. And we are interested in showing people the things that they come to Facebook to see. So content from friends, pages they follow, and every time you do something on Facebook, you're kind of giving us a sense of what it is that you're interested in, and we're going to show you more of that. That is where the challenge comes in, because you're going to see the people and pages that you engage with the most.
Right.
And as we mentioned earlier, this, I think, does reflect how we sort of operate in the real world. You
Right.
talk to certain friends a lot, you live in a certain neighborhood, so you can go to certain places more often, and it's a bit of a reflection in the same way on social media. We did, again, to what I was saying earlier about making changes, we heard from people that this really wasn't working. And at the beginning of 2017, we kind of configured how the algorithm worked and how newsfeed was set up so that you were seeing more things from friends and groups that you were engaged with and real human interaction, as opposed to just seeing pages that you follow where a lot of the worst content or kind of clickbaity content was coming from. And we made a lot of big announcements at how we were focusing on meaningful social interactions, as we were calling it, as opposed to just kind of pelting people with pages and stuff that they considered to be a little more junky in a lot of instances. So we tried to be open with that. We're trying to be responsive. But we're also, again, just trying to create a place where people want to come and spend time and communicate. And so we're trying to balance those two things.
Okay, I think we have time for one question that we're going to ask for to come from a student. So let's, this young man in the back. That's not a student? Are you not a student? Sorry, I think we're actually required to let them ask the first question. Let some of the students ask the first question, sorry.
Hello, Rin McCall with the Global Liberal Arts Alliance. My question is for you, Crystal. As a private sector corporation, how do you situate yourself between allowing unimpeded free speech alongside the increasingly polarized and politicized nature of the platform? And what do you feel is the appropriate level of accountability, both civilly and federally?
Our general position is we want to allow as much speech as possible. We have published community standards that we have since tried to create in more detail and have them published so people know kind of what the rules of the road are. We don't want it to be an anything goes place where people feel unsafe or feel like they're going to be attacked. But we also don't think that we're supposed to be policing everyone's speech, particularly if it's about differing viewpoints or opinions that may not be as popular. Those are allowed to be said. And so, when we're making decisions, we want to err on the side of allowing more speech, not less. And so that's generally where we are. In terms of laws, we're not pretending that we're the government or that we should be telling governments how to handle free speech. So we tend to stay out of the legal aspect of it, but in terms of Facebook, we do have our own published standards, and again, want to encourage debate and people being as informed as possible, and having healthy debates.
So we have time for a couple more questions, so since I robbed you of your question.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm actually a student from South Africa, and for me, I want to just give you this perspective because I'm a student who led Fees Must Fall, who was excluded from university in South Africa. And then I want to just bring this to your attention because the problem is that we are invited, number one, to these gatherings, and then we are not even given a chance to contribute. I flew 14 hours from South Africa to come here, listen to specialists speak, and my voice is not even heard here. When I live here, so I came here, actually I feel useless. I feel like I could have followed this on Twitter because that's where I have a voice.
Okay, well you have a voice, so please use it. What is your question?
I'm saying that's the problem because you want us to only ask. We're not confused about what we want in terms of democracy. We want to also contribute to the conversation so that you understand. We are the students that are on the ground, that are protesting. We are the students that are on Facebook because we have a voice. So give us also an opportunity to contribute.
Okay, do you have a question for Facebook?
No, I have a contribution.
Okay, does anyone have a question? Oh, okay. What is it that you are looking to say? You want to contribute, and I understand that.
My contribution is young people who are the ones that are on Facebook and social media do not have a voice in your spaces. You are not giving us an opportunity to tell you why we feel like democracy is failing us and why we think the only option for us to get a voice is to go and protest on the street. You need to allow us in these spaces of yours because you cannot speak about, for example, the poor without the poor being there.
Sure.
You are speaking there. No one is affected by democracy there.
Yeah.
We are the ones that are affected. We are the ones that feel like democracy don't work for us. I came here, for example, and I'm staying here in the town, in the city. I walk to come here every day, and only today I'm getting the first chance to speak, but I've been putting up my hand. When I go to South Africa, what will happen to my frustrations that I'm feeling now? What will happen to the people that said to me, go and represent us there? What will I say? I will say, I never got a voice. And then the only voice that we have then, it means we must go and protest. So give us an opportunity, give us access to these spaces, allow us to speak and contribute and say our frustrations. Thank you.
I don't, okay.
Thank you for your comments. And allow me to respond in my capacity of organizing this forum. This is something very top of mind for us. We tried this year. I think people like Alvin and Nathan Law and Kasem Eid have brought something different to the forum this year. We have our 24 students from GLLA, and next year I think we're going to partner with a number of youth companies. We're having actually a meeting about this at the end of today. We're looking at a student panel or a youth panel, and maybe even having the voice of youth on every single panel. But, you know, you're at the audience, you can make comments, you're here, you're at the coffee breaks, the networking opportunities. We need to have more youth, and we do take your point.
Can I say something as well? I think about this a lot. I get to go around the world a little bit, and thank you for speaking up and for saying what you said. You know, to end up in places like this, you have to have the experience that people want to have you at the table, or have the agency where people know who you are to invite you to come. And I think this is something I think about a lot as, you know, as we're at a tech company, because we'd like to disrupt and be innovative. We need to hire more diverse voices and young people. And so I think that's a challenge that's incumbent on us too, to be part of making more of these voices heard and giving them the power so that they feel like they're included at these things or invited. And Achilles, thank you for saying that. We would love to work with you on how we get more of these voices at the table. Thank you. That was inspiring.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you as well. Look, like, we may be sat here, but for me, I feel what you're saying. And I hear you, and I get you, and I feel like you've got a seat here today, and let's have a conversation after this and figure out how we can organize so that it's not a missed opportunity. So it'd be great to meet up after to figure out what we can do so that this is not a wasted opportunity. And I think just a final point to say that there's been a lot of negative talk, but I think there's many reasons for hope. Because with any new revolution, whether it be industrial or political or social, it takes time. You know, things are hard, but with these kinds of conversations, these tough conversations, which are many times uncomfortable, and when you break the rules or you make people feel like, why are you talking? That's what leads to progress. Without difference, there's no progress. So I think to end on their message of hope, that what we've just seen now and what we've just been discussing is a sign that democracy is quite healthy.
Well, I do think that's a good note to end on. So thanks so much for our panelists, and I would stick around because we are going to have with us Margareta Vestager. who is currently the European Commissioner for Competition, and I believe she's also the Executive Vice President Designate for Europe for a Digital Age. She's also the woman who has taken on tech giants from Apple to Google, so we're going to have her respond to what she's heard, so we're really happy to have her. But thank you so much for your questions, for listening, and thank you.